All right, we're streaming. We're streaming. Let me just make sure we're streaming. Make sure everything's streaming. We're streaming. We're streaming. We're streaming. We're streaming. We're streaming. Okay, great. I want to say real quick for my Periscope audience, if for some reason later on, and it probably will, if the stream gets all choppy and you can barely hear me, if you watch the replay is like crystal clear. This is weird. I know, I don't know. So basically all I'm saying is if it's too choppy, you could just stop watching, and then whenever it's done, you could watch the replay. Or you could go to my YouTube channel, which is MetaSelf YouTube, right? So everything to do with me, Twitter, YouTube, Periscope, it's all MetaSelf. It's I love it because the name is not, it's not used. I mean, with all the fucking names that go around and people using them, MetaSelf is not a used name. Okay, so we're going to continue off where we were yesterday. Again, real quick to Periscope people, if it gets choppy and you can't hear what I'm saying, just go to my YouTube or wait for the replay video. Wait for the video to get posted after. All right, so we're looking at studies that are peer-reviewed, science studies on drugs, and we're in part 2 now. So just to remind us, the last study we looked at yesterday was a couple of studies looking at how cocaine use in the long term does not have much of a negative effect on cognition, that there is some effect, but it's negligible. And that there's also negligible evidence that in some cases people who use cocaine, either long-term or short-term, have increases in certain parts of their mind and cognition, like verbal learning. So, all right. So what we have here now is from the Oxford Handbook of Substance Use and Substance Use Disorders, which is a peer-reviewed handbook, is cultural perspectives on substance use and substance use disorders. Now, one thing I think that's interesting about this article is that it talks about substance use as different from substance abuse. It explains that there are lots of natural substances, and there's no simple, that the idea of like putting a boundary around what is a drug really cannot be said, right? You can't really, put a nice boundary around these are psychoactives, these aren't. There are definitely ones that everyone agrees, but there are ones that people may not agree on. So it's not a well defined. Although there are ones, like I said, drugs that everyone agrees are drugs. Like for instance, amphetamines, right? So they talk about use. See right here, substance use differs in times of topology. It differs where we're at, and so it looks at variations in substance use itself, right? So here again, this section is just looking at substance use, and it talks about that it can be dangerous, but that usually it's that this it is common, right? That the use itself is as it says here. See, indeed, for the majority of individuals, substance use is not harmful. So this is a big point here, because a lot of people forget this. They seem to forget this part because it's everywhere, And here, the most popular combination of drugs is to take together is alcohol and tobacco. Although I would say caffeine should be included there, but people don't do that consciously, but it's there. People always drink a coffee here and there. The two drugs are identical. So let's go on with the study here. Well, this is more of a review than a study, but it's still peer-reviewed. I mean, it's technically a study. It's just a higher order study, right? So we look at historical perspectives, and so they look at different perspectives in history and through the DSM, and they try to put together what they believe to be a well-defined, inclusive list for what classifies as substance abuse disorder, and they basically use the DSM-5 criteria. So obviously these guys are sympathetic towards psychiatry, but they are willing to admit that most substance use is not harmful. So here is basically our multi-faceted definition of what addiction actually is. And you can see it is, none of it has to do with, if you notice as we're going through this, none of it has to do with using anything often. Have you noticed that? None of this stuff says how often, like there's nothing about frequency of use. Okay? So you could see here that it's not, because most people think addiction is just someone who uses a drug all the time, like they see me smoke weed or something, or take kratom all the time, but it's not that at all. So let's go through each one real quick, what each one means. Role impairment basically talks about, like, if you have a job or you have to fulfill a role somewhere. Let's say you said you're going to help your friend move, and or you had a job to be there at 7 o'clock, and then you were always late, or always not on time, not there, and or when you are fulfilling the role or trying to, you can't fulfill it, like you're maybe you're too doped up or whatever. That's role impairment, right? And by the way, I think you need about three to five of these. You don't need to show all of these. I believe you only need to show a few of them, like maybe 3, 4, 5 of them at once. Hazardous use. So, for instance, you take it in a way that actually harms you, like, injection. There's a right way to use injections, but there's also a wrong way. So that'd be an example of a wrong way. They list here drunk driving. Legal problems. I thought they got rid of this. Oh, no, yeah, it is. There it is. It was right. It's not in the DSM-5. Yeah, because it really doesn't matter. Like, you can make anything illegal. So just because, I can understand the point that a person still gets in trouble and puts themselves at risk of getting locked up for the drug, despite, like they should have known better, and that in of itself, not so much that doing the wrong thing is illegal, not so much that, but the fact that they don't care about getting arrested for the drug. I could see that, but I still think it's best to drop it, because I think that idea of like putting yourself in harm's way, we already covered that with hazardous use. So legal problems, we don't need it. Social problems, again, you have and they call this substance use disorder, by the way, SUD. Again, you just, you never, you keep falling off on your friends, and you don't see them, and especially the ones that don't use the substance you do. And so, tolerance to the drug, withdrawal from the drug, you intend to use it a certain way, and you do much more than you do. You intend to quit or cut down, and you're unable to. You spend way too much time using it or obtaining it, or like, for instance, if one of the points of alcohol addiction would be a person who's like, hungover for the most of the morning, like they're always hungover, always. They got to recover from other. So it's not just the fact that you're on it or that you're getting it, but you're also recovering from it, right? Many interesting, important social activities you're just not doing anymore. You just reduce them. You got psychological issues. So, for instance, this would be a form of comorbidity where in addition to your substance use, it leads to another, problem, like psychological problem, like anxiety or depression. For instance, let's say a junkie, a heroin user, gets to a point where they know they're addicted, and they know they can't really stop on their own, and they're upset and they feel depressed over it. That would be an example. And finally, a craving, not just a desire. See, this doesn't just say a desire to use the substance, like that. Oh, I feel like using this. I got a feeling for this. It's not that at all. Instead, it talks about like a strong desire, that like it's all encompassing. That it's not just like, okay, I got to do this, and if I don't do this, I'm going to get sick later. It's like you want it more than anything else. That you're never like in a situation where you forget to take it. That you just, oh shit, I missed my dose, because you're always thinking about it. So these are basically the multifaceted definition of addiction. You can see, again, it has nothing to do with actual frequency of use. Again, if you're listening to me on Periscope, if it gets choppy later, just wait for the replay or join me on YouTube. And I want to remind everybody, the Cash App is there. My whatever it's called, the Cash App code, whatever it's called. Please, consider, throwing me a few bucks here as a tip. Buy me a beer, coffee, even though I don't drink coffee. You already know. Okay, so yeah, they go over why the DSM-5 is a little different from the other ones. Basically, because they try to do this cross-cutting. They try to find more definitions of what it is outside of just use, right? And so that's great. Let's go to the next one. I want to move somewhat fast through these, because I know I take a long time doing. Let me just check real quick to see if anyone's. Nope, no one's saying a damn thing. All right, cool. So this right here is an interesting study. This deals with the epidemiology of 5-MeO-DMT. So this is the kind of DMT that comes from the frogs, from certain kinds of poisonous frogs, and it's really interesting because hold on. It's really interesting because instead of providing your normal DMT experience of lots of colors and craziness and entities, instead it is basically a void to people. People say that it's like you go to a place of pure nothingness, pure empty beingless, or they describe it as very elemental, like everything is made out of light, or this is where the universe emanates from, or the beginning of it, right? So this is, like I said, this is very different from DMT proper. You're not. There's no entities. There's no hallucinations. Really, it's just kind of a pure feeling of emptiness and paradox, emptiness, fulfillment, and some of the conclusions. You can see lots of studies going on because they did a lot of stats and stuff, and they find that most people use the synthetic version and vape it, and that there is very little addiction or legal problems with it. People who use it on average use it less than 4 times in their whole life, which is Terrence McKenna said this. He was like that. Anyone who's into DMT does it at most once a year because it's just too intense. That's why I get skeptical when I hear about people who use DMT often, who'd say I do, because you could technically keep dosing it. But the flash is really intense, and instead of maybe I could see it if you're on another drug like Xanax or ketamine, and I've seen that people do that regularly. They smoke some DMT, but while on ketamine, to kind of nullify the fear, right? I heard chaga is not as bad as pure DMT. Chaga being smokable ayahuasca, in the sense that the DMT is mixed with an MAOI inhibitor, and instead of just taking it orally in the tea like you would with ayahuasca, instead you just smoke it. And the experiences, they say, a much longer lasting DMT trip, where maybe instead of the whole thing the peak being 5 or 10 minutes, it can last for a good half hour, an hour peak, and it's more subdued too. So that I can see someone doing that more often. Anyway, so this is what we find here. Interesting that the 5-MeO has also been shown in these populations who take it to really help with several psychiatric conditions like anxiety, depression, substance use disorder, to other ones. I personally know some people who have taken DMT, and if it's helped them get rid of nicotine addictions and such. I've seen that for LSD too. These positive self-reported psychotheric effects, or these are self-reported, but still, it's still fruitful for research. There's promising, research here. Okay, and so basically they say that this is similar to other psychedelics, right? These effects, and that all these therapeutic effects, the potential of these tryptamines as the class of these drugs, is basically at least due in part to the fact that they create mystical experiences for people. This is what's interesting. People see ketamine as helping depression, but you understand it's not the actual ketamine experience. It's the glutamate upregulation that happens 48 hours after the experience. So this is after you're high and everything, and then it's just glutamate just starts, upticking, and then it automatically increases serotonin and dopamine. And the idea is that normal antidepressants take weeks to do that, and with ketamine you could do that indirect process, and it happens within 48 hours, which is amazing, because people get benefit of antidepressive effects immediately, 2-3 days, but the actual experience has nothing to do with that. You could be sedated through the experience, although it's impossible to, but you could if you could nullify all the hallucinations and you would still get the effect. However, for tryptamines like mushrooms and this DMT 5-MeO DMT, it's been shown that the actual therapeutic effects stem from the fact that they have the occasion, as they say, these mystical experiences. And that they're only slightly challenging. Talk about the duration and stuff. Okay. So let's look at. Oh man. I think I might have to go. Hold on, everybody. I knew this was going to happen. Okay. All right, everyone. Can I pause this stream? No, I can't. So, alright, you know what, I'm just gonna come back, I'll call it the same damn thing, we'll see what happens. If not, I'll just do everything over again. I'll be back within